August 1960. A senior Soviet GRU colonel approaches two American students on a Moscow bridge, carrying an envelope containing an offer to commit treason against the Soviet Union, an act punishable by execution. The Americans accept the envelope and walk away quickly, unaware this awkward encounter will trigger one of the most valuable intelligence operations in history. Within 2 years, this colonel will photograph over 5,000 pages of classified Soviet military documents, provide intelligence that prevents nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and pay for his betrayal with his life. This is the story of how Western intelligence planted a spy at the highest levels of the Kremlin. The GRU represented more than just another intelligence agency. The Chief Intelligence Directorate of the Soviet General Staff gave its senior officers access to the most sensitive strategic planning in the Communist bloc. While the KGB handled internal security and foreign espionage, the GRU controlled military intelligence, coordinating with Warsaw Pact allies and briefing Soviet leadership on matters of war and peace. Officers at GRU headquarters reviewed satellite reconnaissance of NATO bases, assessed Western nuclear capabilities, and prepared intelligence assessments for Politburo members and military commanders. Western intelligence understood the value of penetrating this organization, but security surrounding Soviet military intelligence made such penetration nearly impossible. The GRU recruited only loyal Communist Party members, subjected officers to extensive background investigations, and cultivated institutional culture, treating contact with Westerners as potential treason. Officers worked in secure buildings with multiple security layers, handled documents in controlled environments, and understood suspicious behavior triggered immediate investigation. By 1960, Western intelligence had achieved almost no success penetrating the GRU at senior levels. Previous recruitment attempts failed catastrophically, exposing CIA and MI6 methods to Soviet counterintelligence. The few defectors possessed limited access and outdated information. Technical intelligence collection could not replace human sources. Reconnaissance satellites photographed Soviet bases, but could not reveal strategic thinking guiding Soviet military planners. The Soviet Union's most critical secrets remained locked inside the minds and filing cabinets of a few hundred senior officers. By 1960, American and British intelligence faced a dangerous blind spot that could cost them the Cold War. President Eisenhower worried constantly about the missile gap, a supposed Soviet advantage in nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev boasted publicly that Soviet factories produced missiles like sausages, that the Soviet Union could strike any American city, that the correlation of forces had shifted decisively toward communism. American analysts lacked concrete information to verify or refute these claims. Reconnaissance photographs showed Soviet missile bases, but could not reveal how many missiles existed, whether they worked reliably, or when they might be deployed in threatening numbers. What was the actual Soviet missile inventory? How accurate were these weapons? What targeting doctrine guided deployment? These questions dominated Kennedy administration debates as the young president inherited an increasingly dangerous strategic situation. The Bay of Pigs disaster demonstrated how miscalculation led to catastrophe, while the Berlin crisis brought superpowers to the brink over a divided city symbolizing Cold War tensions. Western intelligence needed detailed technical specifications of Soviet missile systems, deployment schedules, strategic planning documents, and tactical doctrine. This intelligence would allow American planners to design countermeasures and calibrate deterrent strategies based on knowledge rather than fear. A miscalculation about Soviet capabilities could cause dangerous underestimation or wasteful overestimation, triggering unnecessary arms races. Either error could prove catastrophic, potentially causing crises escalating into nuclear war. Recruiting a Soviet military intelligence officer required more than money and promises. Ideological commitment driving men to join the GRU ran deep, reinforced by years of Marxist-Leninist education and institutional culture, celebrating sacrifice for the socialist motherland. Western intelligence had spent decades attempting to crack this ideological armor with limited success. Traditional approaches offering money or threatening blackmail rarely worked against Soviet officers who viewed such tactics as confirmation of Western moral bankruptcy. The few successful recruitments involved individuals disillusioned through personal experience, discovering Soviet reality contradicted communist promises. The risks of approaching Soviet officers were enormous. Misjudgment about a target's loyalty resulted in immediate arrest, diplomatic crisis, and exposure of intelligence methods. Soviet counterintelligence actively penetrated Western services by dangling false volunteers who reported recruitment techniques. Moscow's security environment made covert operations nearly impossible. KGB surveillance teams monitored foreigners constantly, photographing contacts and investigating anyone meeting Soviet citizens. Western diplomats operated assuming every conversation was recorded and every movement watched. Yet intelligence officers knew ideology could crack under the right pressure. Personal grievances, professional disappointments, moral disillusionment, these vulnerabilities existed even within ideologically committed officers. Some professionals argued the West should wait for volunteers, individuals approaching Western officials on their own initiative. This passive approach frustrated operational planners, but offered one advantage. Volunteers had already decided to commit treason before contact. Oleg Penkovsky was not a typical Soviet military officer. Born in 1919 to a family with ties to the old Russian military establishment, he had navigated Soviet society through ability and careful political positioning. His father, an artillery officer who fought for white forces during the Civil War, died before Oleg remembered him, but this background created complications following Penkovsky throughout his career. Soviet authorities viewed White Army children with suspicion despite outward conformity. Penkovsky overcame this through demonstrated competence, eventually earning GRU assignment based on intelligence and technical expertise. By 1960, he held the rank of colonel, with a position giving him access to some of the Soviet Union's most closely guarded military secrets. He attended high-level briefings on strategic planning, reviewed classified intelligence assessments, and handled documents revealing the true state of Soviet missile development. Yet beneath this success, Penkovsky carried grievances festering over years. He believed he had been passed over for deserved promotions, watching less capable officers with better connections advance. Discrimination because of his father's background never disappeared entirely. His worldview shifted as classified information contradicted official propaganda. Documents revealed Soviet military capabilities fell far short of public claims, that Soviet technology lagged Western achievements, that Khrushchev's boasted correlation of forces was largely fiction. This gap between propaganda and reality created disillusionment. Penkovsky began seeing the Soviet system as corrupt bureaucracy led by men who lied while threatening world peace through reckless nuclear brinkmanship. By 1960, he concluded the Soviet Union represented a threat requiring containment, that Western intelligence deserved the information he possessed, and that he was willing to commit treason to provide it. The two American students who accepted Penkovsky's envelope in August 1960 had no training in intelligence tradecraft. They were exchange program participants studying Russian language when a Soviet colonel pressed an envelope into their hands. They accepted from confusion, walking away without fully comprehending what occurred. The envelope contained handwritten Russian text explaining the writer was a Soviet military intelligence officer with strategic information access, wanting to provide intelligence to American and British services, understanding the risks but believing the cause justified them. Attached were documents appearing to be genuine Soviet military materials, including missile system specifications. The students delivered the envelope to the U.S. Embassy the following day. CIA officers' first assumption was skepticism. Soviet counterintelligence had tried similar provocations before. A GRU colonel approaching random students made no operational sense. CIA officers examined documents, comparing them against existing intelligence. Technical experts studied missile specifications. The assessment came back cautiously positive. Documents appeared genuine, containing details matching known information while providing new plausible data. This suggested authenticity, but did not eliminate the possibility of sophisticated KGB operations. The decision required balancing potential intelligence value against operational risks. If genuine, Penkovsky represented exactly the source Western intelligence needed. If a KGB plant, pursuing him would expose methods and waste resources. CIA decided to proceed cautiously, bringing in MI6 for consultation. The operation received code names Hero and Yoga, reflecting joint collaboration. The challenge was establishing secure communications without alerting Soviet counterintelligence. Running an agent inside GRU headquarters required operational security, leaving no room for error. Every contact risked exposure, meaning loss of a valuable source and potential diplomatic crisis. Western intelligence needed methods allowing regular information passage while maintaining plausible deniability. MI6 provided an ideal cutout through Greville Wynne, a British businessman traveling frequently to the Soviet Union arranging trade deals. Wynne had established legitimate business presence in Moscow, giving reason to meet Soviet officials without arousing suspicion. Wynne received basic tradecraft training and agreed to serve as courier despite the risks. Janet Chisholm, wife of an MI6 officer stationed in Moscow, provided another contact point. As a diplomat's wife, she moved around Moscow with slightly less surveillance, attending social functions and visiting parks where Penkovsky could approach her during casual conversations. The dead drop system offered the most secure transfer method. Penkovsky identified Moscow locations where he could hide film canisters, cigarette packs, or candy boxes containing intelligence. Chalk marks on lampposts signaled drops were loaded or collected. The Minox camera became Penkovsky's primary collection tool. This miniature camera photographed documents rapidly while producing high-quality images. Western officers trained Penkovsky during meetings outside the Soviet Union. He practiced until the process became automatic. Film canisters could be hidden easily and passed through dead drops. Penkovsky's access allowed him to photograph materials transforming Western understanding of Soviet capabilities, missile system manuals, strategic deployment plans, intelligence assessments, doctrine documents, leadership briefing materials. Communication protocols established clear procedures for different situations. If facing immediate danger, Penkovsky made specific marks triggering emergency procedures. Normal operations followed rhythms balancing security against intelligence flow. The operation required careful CIA MI6 coordination. Officers met regularly to coordinate handling, assess intelligence, and adjust security. By spring 1961, all systems were operational, and Penkovsky had demonstrated ability to access valuable intelligence and commitment despite risks. From early 1961 through October 1962, Oleg Penkovsky photographed over 5,000 pages of classified Soviet military documents using the Minox camera. The material overwhelmed analysts, requiring translation teams and strategic experts working around the clock. Each film canister contained dozens of document images, technical manuals, strategic assessments, deployment schedules, intelligence reports revealing Soviet military planning's inner workings. The most valuable material focused on Soviet missile systems. Penkovsky photographed complete technical manuals for SS-4 and SS-5 medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles, including specifications on range, payload, accuracy, fuel requirements, launch procedures, and maintenance. These manuals contained precise information Western intelligence needed. Technical details allowed American engineers to understand exactly how weapons worked, performance limitations, and potential countermeasures. Strategic intelligence proved equally valuable. Documents showed Soviet nuclear weapons inventories revealing actual operational warheads fell far short of Western estimates and Soviet claims. Instead of Khrushchev's boasted massive arsenal, the Soviet Union possessed limited nuclear weapons and delivery systems, many unreliable or under development. This transformed Western strategic planning, confirming the missile gap was non-existent or favored the United States. Tactical doctrine documents revealed how Soviet commanders expected to fight nuclear war, including targeting priorities, launch procedures, command systems, and early warning capabilities. Western planners could now design strategies based on understanding how adversaries would actually fight rather than theoretical assumptions. Dead drops became the primary passing mechanism. Penkovsky loaded drop sites during evening walks. Mi-6 officers collected material quickly, minimizing exposure time. The system worked through dozens of successful transfers. Meetings with Janet Chisholm occurred at parks and social functions where contact appeared coincidental. These meetings allowed Penkovsky to provide context, answer questions, and receive new requirements. Travel opportunities allowed extensive debriefings outside the Soviet Union. During London and Paris visits, he spent hours in safe houses explaining Soviet structures, identifying key officials, describing security procedures, and providing leadership assessments. The psychological toll mounted as Penkovsky operated under constant risk. He grew bolder over time, taking risks, worrying his handlers, but reflecting commitment to providing intelligence he believed could prevent nuclear war. Western agencies shared Penkovsky's material across NATO, distributing sanitized versions, protecting the source while providing critical intelligence. American planners incorporated revelations into assessments, adjusting force postures based on accurate understanding rather than worst-case assumptions. October 1962. CIA analysts studying U-2 photographs of Cuba faced an urgent question determining whether the world stumbled into nuclear war. Photographs showed missile installations under construction, but identifying exact missile types proved difficult from aerial imagery. Construction sites suggested medium or intermediate range ballistic missiles, but photographs could not reveal specific systems or capabilities. Without this information, Kennedy and advisors could not assess the threat or design appropriate response. The answer lay in technical manuals Penkovsky had photographed. CIA photo interpreters compared Cuban reconnaissance images to diagrams in Penkovsky's materials, matching construction patterns, equipment configurations, and support vehicles to specifications for SS-4 and SS-5 missiles. The identification was conclusive. The Soviet Union had deployed missiles capable of striking throughout the southeastern United States and threatening cities as far as Washington. Warheads these missiles would carry, based on specifications Penkovsky provided, could devastate American cities with megaton yields. Penkovsky's intelligence revealed critical details shaping Kennedy's response. Technical manuals indicated missiles required weeks to become operational after delivery, including site preparation, equipment testing, and command integration. Reconnaissance showed Cuban sites remained under construction, suggesting missiles were not yet ready. This bought time for diplomacy, allowing Kennedy to pursue blockade and negotiations rather than immediate military action. The intelligence also revealed Soviet limitations, reducing pressure for preemptive strikes. Penkovsky had documented Soviet strategic forces were smaller and less capable than propaganda claimed. This gave Kennedy confidence American forces maintained superiority, reducing fear that delaying action would allow Soviet decisive advantage. Technical specifications allowed military planners to develop targeting packages for potential strikes against Cuban sites. Understanding missiles' vulnerability to conventional attack enabled precision planning, giving Kennedy options. Throughout 13 days, Penkovsky's intelligence informed American decision-making at the highest levels. Kennedy's advisors referenced materials during executive committee meetings, using Soviet documents to understand what Khrushchev knew about his own forces and what assumptions might drive Soviet decisions. The crisis resolved through diplomacy, blockade, and negotiations, resulting in Soviet missiles withdrawn from Cuba. Kennedy administration officials consistently emphasized Penkovsky's materials gave them confidence to negotiate rather than launch preemptive strikes, triggering the very war they sought to prevent. The rocket manuals identifying Cuban missiles represented only a fraction of what Penkovsky delivered. Complete document catalogs provided comprehensive understanding of Soviet strategic capabilities, military organization, intelligence operations, and leadership thinking requiring decades to acquire through other methods. Strategic Nuclear Forces documentation revealed the true state of Soviet missile development. Penkovsky photographed technical assessments showing Soviet ICBMs remained unreliable, suffering guidance failures, fuel problems, and maintenance challenges limiting operational availability. Documents detailed specific failure rates, allowing American intelligence to calculate how many Soviet missiles might actually function in combat. This confirmed the missile gap rested on false assumptions. Command and control intelligence proved equally valuable. Penkovsky provided organizational charts showing Soviet nuclear command structure, communications procedures linking missile forces to political leadership, and authorization protocols governing launch decisions. These revealed a system more centralized than Western analysts assumed, with launch authority concentrated in Moscow. Understanding this structure allowed assessing warning times for potential attacks. Technical specifications extended beyond missiles to Soviet aircraft, radar systems, air defense networks, and conventional forces. Penkovsky photographed bomber performance data, air defense system documentation revealing radar coverage gaps, and material on Soviet tank and artillery systems updating NATO understanding. Intelligence assessment documents showed how Soviet military intelligence evaluated NATO capabilities. Penkovsky photographed GRU reports analyzing Western exercises, assessing command structures, and evaluating American tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. These revealed what the Soviet Union knew about Western forces, allowing NATO to identify which capabilities remained secret. Soviet military doctrine materials explained how commanders expected to fight various conflicts. Penkovsky provided documents outlining offensive operations plans for conventional war in Europe, showing emphasis on rapid armored advances supported by tactical nuclear weapons. Understanding Soviet operational concepts allowed NATO to design defensive strategies countering expected tactics. Translation teams worked intensively extracting maximum value. Russian-speaking analysts examined each document, creating summaries for policymakers while flagging technical details requiring specialist expertise. The material flowed through multiple analysis layers, transforming raw documents into actionable intelligence. Distribution protocols ensured intelligence reached appropriate consumers while protecting the source. Sanitized reports removed details revealing how information was obtained. The most sensitive materials remained tightly compartmented, accessible only to officials with special clearances. The intelligence Penkovsky provided influenced American strategic policy far beyond the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy used material to reshape defense posture, negotiating strategy, and long-term planning for managing Cold War competition. confidence from knowing actual Soviet capabilities allowed pursuing policies balancing strength with restraint. Arms control negotiations benefited directly. When Kennedy officials pursued the Limited Test Ban Treaty signed in 1963, they negotiated knowing the true state of Soviet nuclear capabilities, and understanding Moscow sought the treaty partly to constrain American technological advantages. The Berlin crisis presented immediate opportunities to apply Penkovsky's intelligence. Soviet pressure on West Berlin raised fears Khrushchev might risk military confrontation. Penkovsky's materials revealed Soviet military planners doubted their ability to defeat NATO forces in sustained conventional conflict, suggesting threats were primarily political. Kennedy used this understanding to stand firm while avoiding provocations, forcing Khrushchev into unwanted actions. Defense budget priorities shifted as intelligence clarified what capabilities required immediate attention. The Kennedy administration reduced planned production of some systems while accelerating others based on understanding actual Soviet capabilities. These adjustments saved billions while maintaining strategic advantages, deterring Soviet aggression. Intelligence sharing with NATO allies strengthened the alliance by providing common understanding of Soviet capabilities. Kennedy officials briefed Allied leaders on Soviet weaknesses, Penkovsky revealed, reducing fears Soviet conventional forces could overrun Western Europe before American reinforcements arrived. Kennedy's personal confidence in managing Soviet relations grew from his access to Penkovsky's intelligence. The president could engage in correspondence with Khrushchev and crisis management, knowing the actual strategic balance rather than operating on assumptions. The intelligence advantage persisted even after Penkovsky's arrest. Material he delivered continued informing American policy for years as analysts extracted new insights. Operation Hero represented more than single successful recruitment, producing valuable intelligence before ending in tragedy. The operation demonstrated human intelligence could penetrate even the most secure Soviet institutions when the right individual chose betrayal over loyalty. Lessons learned from running Penkovsky influenced intelligence operations for decades. Western services studied the operation intensively after Penkovsky's arrest, documenting what worked and codifying best practices for recruiting and handling sources in hostile environments. The passive approach of waiting for volunteers rather than aggressive recruitment emerged as preferred method. Intelligence agencies recognized volunteers possess stronger motivation than recruited agents, making them more reliable and willing to accept necessary risks. CIA MI6 collaboration established patterns for future joint operations. Despite occasional friction, the services worked together smoothly. Recognizing pooled resources often produced better results than competing independently. Soviet security services learned painful lessons transforming counterintelligence approaches. The GRU and KGB implemented additional security measures around classified documents, increased surveillance of personnel with sensitive access, and refined techniques for detecting insider threats. These changes made subsequent penetrations more difficult. The psychological impact extended beyond specific security changes. Penkovsky's betrayal created paranoia within Soviet military intelligence, encouraging suspicion of colleagues and reluctance to trust anyone completely. Western intelligence drew strategic conclusions about Soviet vulnerabilities influencing long-term planning. Penkovsky's success demonstrated personal grievances could overcome ideological commitment when individuals faced discrimination, professional frustration, or moral disillusionment. The precedent Penkovsky established influenced later defections and recruitments. Soviet officials contemplating treason knew Western intelligence would protect them and provide financial security. Several subsequent high-level Soviet sources cited Penkovsky's example when explaining their own decisions. Intelligence community culture absorbed the Penkovsky case as legendary example of successful espionage. Training programs used the operation to illustrate proper tradecraft and importance of protecting exceptional sources. The material Penkovsky delivered continued influencing Western strategic thinking long after the Cold War ended. When Soviet archives became partially accessible, historians compared Penkovsky's intelligence to documents showing actual Soviet capabilities and found his materials remarkably accurate. October 22, 1962. The same day Kennedy announced the Cuban blockade, KGB officers arrested Oleg Penkovsky at his Moscow apartment. Soviet counterintelligence had been investigating Penkovsky for weeks, monitoring his movements and building a case. How the KGB identified him remains partially unclear. Soviet counterintelligence may have detected surveillance anomalies around dead drops or noticed patterns suggesting intelligence activities. The arrest of a CIA officer servicing one of Penkovsky's dead drops the same day suggests KGB surveillance had been watching before deciding to shut down the operation. The KGB moved decisively once they confirmed Penkovsky's betrayal. Arrest teams searched his apartment for evidence while transporting him to KGB headquarters for interrogation. Documents, camera equipment, and espionage materials provided physical evidence supporting treason charges. The public trial in May 1963 provided glimpses of what KGB obtained from him. Penkovsky appeared gaunt and exhausted, suggesting the pressure applied during interrogation. He confessed to espionage, admitted photographing classified documents, acknowledged contact with British and American intelligence officers, and accepted responsibility for betraying Soviet military secrets. The trial served Soviet political purposes beyond prosecuting a spy. State media covered proceedings extensively, using Penkovsky's case to illustrate Western espionage threats and justify security measures restricting Soviet contact with foreigners. The court delivered a predetermined guilty verdict, sentencing Penkovsky to death. Soviet law allowed no appeal in espionage cases involving military secrets, and the sentence was carried out shortly after trial. Reports suggest execution by firing squad. His name was erased from Soviet military records, and his family suffered official discrimination. Greville Wynne, arrested during a business trip to Hungary, faced trial alongside Penkovsky. The British businessman received an 8-year sentence, serving time before being exchanged for a Soviet agent. Western intelligence officers involved avoided arrest due to diplomatic immunity, though KGB expelled several British and American officials from Moscow in retaliation. Oleg Penkovsky is widely considered the most important Western intelligence source of the Cold War period. Intelligence historians examining the full scope of documents he provided and strategic decisions his intelligence influenced consistently rank him above other famous Soviet sources. Material he delivered exceeded in volume and significance what others produced, arriving when the intelligence proved directly relevant to preventing nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The assessment that Penkovsky saved the world rests on his intelligence's role during October 1962. Without technical manuals, he photographed. CIA analysts might not have identified Cuban missiles quickly or accurately, potentially delaying American response until missiles became operational. Without understanding Soviet strategic weaknesses, Kennedy might have felt pressured to launch preemptive strikes rather than pursuing blockade and negotiations resolving the crisis peacefully. Comparison to other Cold War spies highlights Penkovsky's unique contribution. Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen betrayed American and British operations, causing enormous damage but providing tactical information rather than strategic intelligence changing history's course. Oleg Gordievsky delivered valuable intelligence about Soviet intentions but lacked access to military planning documents making Penkovsky's intelligence transformative. His motivations distinguish him from spies who worked primarily for money. While Western intelligence provided compensation, his initial approach came before payment was offered, driven by ideological conviction that the Soviet system threatened humanity. This ideological motivation made him more committed than financially motivated sources. Cultural representations appeared in books, films, and television productions dramatizing his espionage activities. Documentary productions examining the Cuban Missile Crisis featured Penkovsky's intelligence as a crucial element in Kennedy's decision-making. Intelligence professionals studying Penkovsky's case continue drawing lessons relevant to contemporary operations. The importance of volunteers over recruited agents, value of patient cultivation, necessity of rigorous security measures. These principles remain fundamental to intelligence tradecraft. The question of whether Penkovsky truly saved the world admits no definitive answer. What seems certain is his intelligence gave Kennedy options and confidence during the Cuban Missile Crisis that would not have existed without it. In the shadow wars of the Cold War, where victories were measured in prevented conflicts rather than won battles, Oleg Penkovsky achieved something extraordinary. He gave the West intelligence to navigate its most dangerous crisis without triggering Armageddon, and demonstrated that individual courage combined with moral conviction could influence history's course at moments when humanity's survival hung in the balance. Thank you for watching this story until the end. Operation Hero remains one of the most important intelligence operations in history, proving that individual courage can change human events. Oleg Penkovsky's decision to betray the Soviet Union gave Western leaders intelligence they needed to prevent nuclear war during the Cold War's most dangerous crisis. If you found this story captivating, please share it with others who appreciate hidden operations that shaped our world. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into untold stories of espionage and intelligence operations that determined the Cold War's outcome. Your support helps us bring these remarkable stories to light. Until next time, stay curious,